Hello everybody, it's Darth. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. A few friends have asked for a guide on weak auras. So I'm going to make a video tutorial here on weak auras, go through and talk about it, and actually show you guys setting up several of the auras. Okay, so to get started, once you install weak auras, all you have to do is type /WA, and that'll bring up your weak auras options. There's a lot of stuff here, so we're going to go through this panel in just a second. But first, let's talk about what weak auras or what an aura is. Auras are any buffs, debuffs, cooldowns, the status of an ability, things that are in the combat log itself. All of these things, weak auras can track and display information based on that information, or based on what it is that you've set up to track. So in the initial interface, we have these items over here that you can select. So whenever you select new, these are the different types of auras that you can set up. So you can do a progress texture, which, as you can see, it simply has a icon or an image where the color goes down or it goes up based on what you want. Groups, which we'll talk about a little later on. You can have text. An icon, which is the most common one that you'll see in our kill videos, progress bars, and I'll actually show you how to import an aura. Now over here on the left, you have two different openable menus, loaded and not loaded. These are the auras that I am currently, or actually these are the auras that weak auras is currently looking at. They are currently tracking these auras. These auras down here are possibly different classes, such as combo points, or on my rogue and my feral druid. Dragon soul debuffs, I'm not in the Dragon soul raid instance, so I don't have it tracking that. It is very important as you use weak auras more and more, and as it grows larger and larger, it's very important that you look at the loaded state of your auras to ensure that you only have loaded what you need at any given time. Because if, for example, the Dragon Soul debuffs or group down here was in my loaded state, then weak auras would constantly look to see, are any of these debuffs active right now? That's obviously a problem whenever I'm sitting here in the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, because it's never going to happen. Thus, I am actually using computing power to track something that is impossible. So, we will talk about the loaded, not loaded, how to set all that stuff up in the next segment. Okay, so to talk about the loaded, not loaded, and the other stuff, we're just going to set up a quick aura. Doesn't matter, we'll just call it test because I'm going to delete this in just a moment. What I really want to do is go over all of these different items up here and tell you a little bit about what they are. Now, the first thing you need to know is that for every aura that you create, regardless of what type it is, be it an icon such as this one, text, or whatever, you're going to see these items up here: display, trigger, load, action, animations. What will be different are various things in here. Now, they will all have the same feel to them. If you create one, it's a progress bar, you're immediately going to know how to create one that's an icon. It's not that different, but there will be subtle differences. For example, a progress bar will have a text box over here for what's on the left side of a progress bar, and another one over here for what's on the right side of a progress bar. The other ones may or may not have those two text boxes because they do or don't have two areas for you to put text. So the first thing are displays. These options here change what the icon itself looks like, and there you can see the icon itself. So you can come in here, play with the height, play with the width, various things that you can do. Triggers are the important thing in weak auras. These determine when something shows up and when it goes away. Now, there are three types of trigger, or actually, sorry, four. They just added I believe the event type. There is an aura These are specifically defined as buffs and debuffs. Custom, which I have never used, so if you find a use for this, wonderful. In fact, if you look in the description, there are several websites that have a lot of auras. They might use custom. I generally don't. Event, this is actually tracking through your event log. And status, so you can check on things like the health of the player. You can here's all the different statuses that you can look at, and we'll talk about a few of these a little later on. You have the unit type, so whether or not you want to check on something on the focus, on a specific unit, so you can actually name something. So maybe it's a specific target that you want to look at, or maybe it's a specific player in your raid that you want to know if they have a buff or a debuff active at any given time. Pet, pretty self-explanatory, as well as player and target. You can set up the auras to show up only when health conditions are set. So maybe you want an icon to show up if you're playing a warrior. You want a skull and crossbones to show up when the target is under 20% health, because that lets you know that you need to be using execute. I'm sorry, that would be health percent, not health. Health is an actual number. And then you can do hide, so you can do custom conditions for when it shows and when it hides. Generally speaking, I always leave that on automatic. Here is the load panel. And this panel is what determines what shows up in my loaded list here and my not loaded list. So let's go through some of the options here. In combat, pretty self-explanatory. If you've created an aura that you want to turn on and off by yourself at any given time by yourself, then you can choose never, and it will never automatically load it. If you want to check on a specific, player name, you can set that here. If you want something on a specific class, there's how you set that. Now, some of these have an interesting side effect in that if you click it a second time, now you can choose multiple classes. So maybe you play a mage and a warlock, and you want to check, you have the same trinket, and you want to know when that trinket procs, so you set up an aura. Well, now you can say, okay, well, I don't want to check this if I'm playing my Death Knight, only if I'm playing my mage and my warlock. You can choose this based on your talent specialization. And now the interesting thing here is, unlike other add-ons, it is not primary/secondary. In weak auras, it actually understands the 3 different specs, so you can now set up auras for all 3 specs, and if you're not in that given spec, then it simply will not show up. So it is a very, very nice thing that that they've put in here. And it too, if you click this a second time, you get the multiple select options. If you have specific talents that you want to check on, maybe this talent right here is some cooldown that you want to use and you want to track when it's usable. Now you can have it set up so that it will only load when you have that talent. Player level zone, so maybe this is how I got this Dragon Soul debuff. It's not loaded because I actually told it the zone is Dragon Soul. Instance type, so there are your various instance types. And dungeon difficulty, and even your role. So if you're a healer, you want certain things, whereas if you're a damage dealer or a tank, you want other things. Actions, these are a list of things that occur while the aura is active. Generally, these occur when the aura becomes active, so on show or on hide. And you can just have it spit out a chat message, for example. I actually have another add-on that I use to do that, but I could actually get rid of the second add-on and have weak auras handle every bit of it. It would just require me to go in and set up a bunch of new auras, and I really don't want to do that. And one of my guild members mentioned this, that someone had created an aura where it would flash whenever it's active, it would kind of pulse. That is set up here in the animations. So start is whenever the aura comes onto the screen. Main is while it's on the screen, and finish is when it leaves. So I can come in here, say a preset aura on this, and I want it to flash, and now you can see that the aura is in fact flashing. So that's it for the general overview of weak auras. Now we're actually going to go in and create an aura from scratch. Alright, so the initial request was someone wanted to know how you create a progress bar. Now I use ElvUI, that's my general UI here, so it already has all this stuff in here for me. So if I come up and hit Frost Fever, there's my progress bar. But doing this in weak auras, if you don't want to use Elv or other add-ons, is very, very easy to do. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So again, we're going to type WA. That's going to give me my weak auras interface. I'm going to come down here to progress bar, and I'm going to create a new progress bar. I'm going to name it Frost Fever. Again, if you go back and watch the earlier video, you'll see that this screen has changed quite a bit. Now I have got a bunch of text options that I didn't have on the other on the icon that I had created earlier. And that's because the icon doesn't have any text. So weak auras has different presets, and thus this screen is going to look a little bit different. Let's go through a few of these things just real quickly. So what you can see is you see up there %P, %T, %N. These are predefined notations that you can put in that will change what this text says. So you can actually change the different types of these texts to pretty much whatever you want, though if you go outside of what they have predefined, it does get a little more complicated. Up here at the top, you can just change the way that this looks. There you go. You can have it display an icon or not display an icon. You can tell it, if I want to choose the icon, or it's going to automatically grab the icon based on the debuff or the buff that I've supplied it. And then if you scroll down, there's a bunch of other things down here that you can play with on your own. So again, what I want to do is create a progress bar for Frost Fever. So I'm going to come over to my triggers. The aura name is the name of the debuff, which is Frost Fever. I'm not going to track it on myself. I want to track it on my target. And Frost Fever is not a buff. It is in fact a debuff. So with these simple options, now when I come up to my target, actually, before I do that, there's a few things we should discuss. Down here towards the bottom, we need to go over a few of these things. So you can do remaining time based on, I only want it to show whenever there's 3 seconds remaining so that I know to refresh something. Only if it has a certain number of stacks. These two down here are things that you are really going to want to pay attention to. So let's say that you have 2 different Death Knights in your raid group. As it stands at this very second, if me and the other Death Knight were in the same group and we both started attacking that target dummy, we would both apply Frost Fever. Weak auras would not differentiate between the two. We have told it, does the target have Frost Fever? Yes, the target does. I'm going to show you a timer. Doesn't matter that it's not your Frost Fever, so you can actually go through an entire fight, and the entire time you're thinking, okay, I've got Frost Fever up, when in reality you don't, and that's going to be a massive loss to your DPS. So one of the things that you will almost always want to do is have own only selected. Inverse is a great tool to have whenever you're wanting to display icons. What it will do is it will say, okay, the target dummy or my target does not have Frost Fever, therefore I'm going to show, in this case, a progress bar. Generally for progress bars, it's not going to be a very big thing to, it's not going to be very helpful, but for icons, and you'll see some of those in examples I have later, they become immensely helpful. Now on the load, I'm going to come over here and change a few things. I obviously only want this to show up when I'm in combat. And I only want this to show up, or only want this to load, if I'm on my Death Knight. Now in this particular instance, I don't care which spec I'm playing, so any Death Knight that I have is going to work just fine. With those changes that I've made, when I come up here, I now have my progress bar displaying for me. It is showing my timers. Oh, I actually got out of combat. So there we go. Now I'm in combat, and I'll stay in combat. So as you can tell, it's got 14 seconds down here. So there's a little variance between what these two things are seeing, and maybe a half a second or so. But it is a quick and easy way to create a very nice set of progress bars. Now that we have our progress bar set up, I'm going to go in and I'm going to show you how to do the exact same thing. There's my progress bar. I'm going to delete this. And what I'm going to do now is do the exact same functionality. The only difference is I am going to do this as an icon. So right off the bat, you'll see this little number 1. That's how many stacks, because that's the text. I don't want stacks. I actually want it to be a timer, which is %p. And you can now see that it is, in fact, a timer. I'm going to scroll down. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to stay right here. I'm going to change this to the center of the box. I'm going to change the font size a little bit because I don't see very well. I'm actually going to move this over a little bit, which this is how you move things, just grabbing, and there you go. You can also move things with a set of sliders down here. Now we're actually going to create my aura. So again, I'm going to track the Frost Fever aura, and because I have this automatic icon selected up here, it automatically determines, or I automatically knows, I should say, that this is the icon for Frost Fever. This is going to be on my target, not on a player, and it is going to be a debuff, not a buff. The interesting thing, whenever I click Own Only, it gets a little confused. Weak Auras doesn't really know what the hell that is. So all you have to do is unselect automatic icon. You can come in here, type Frost Fever, select that, and there's my icon back again. Load only in combat, and again only if I am on my Death Knight. So within a few seconds I have now created a new aura to track Frost Fever, and there it is. In this part of the tutorial, I'm actually going to create a new icon, and this time it's going to show the stacks. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to delete this, and instead of creating a new one, I'm actually going to use one that I already have. Actually, it's not in that group. It is in this group, and that is my capacitance. So my meta gem gives me a charge of capacitance every so often, and I thought it would be kind of nice to be able to see when I'm getting these charges for whatever reason. So again, this is a icon type. So the type is icon, the exact same as what it was before. The big difference though is that I'm going to leave %s as the default text. The trigger is called capacitance. It's a player buff. I don't need to do own only because it's always going to be me doing it. And actually I didn't put in combat, but that's fine. So now whenever I come up here, and for the record you can actually see where your icons are going to be showing up whenever you click on an icon, and it's right down here. Just kind of out of the way because it's not something that changes how I do things. It's just a nice thing to have on my screen. So you can see it counting up, and it just discharged, therefore I don't have capacitance anymore, and now I do. And that's how you create an icon with stacks. The next aura type that we're going to talk about are icons for cooldowns, and we're also at the same time going to talk about multiple trigger icons. So again, we're going to open up weak auras, and this actually works out great because this is a list of all the auras that I have on my Death Knight when I'm in combat. A lot of these are going to be multiple triggers, and a lot of these tell me when cooldowns are ready. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these. The first one right off the bat, missing Bone Shield. So if I'm playing on my if I'm playing Blood, then every time Bone Shield comes off of cooldown, I need it back on. I want as much time with Bone Shield on as possible. So I have an aura that tells me when to do that. So if we go over here and we look at the trigger, we see that there are two different triggers in this aura. When you start to apply multiple triggers, you get a new option up here at the top, and it's called Required for Activation. And there are two options, all triggers or any triggers. All triggers means that every trigger that you have listed has to be true in order for that icon to show up. Any triggers means that any of the conditions have to be true. So for my Bone Shield aura, I've got two different triggers. The first trigger is an aura trigger. What I'm doing is I'm checking the player for a buff called Bone Shield. Now that doesn't sound right, because if I have Bone Shield on, why would I want to cast it again? That's where the handy dandy little inverse comes in. So what I'm doing is saying, I want you to check me, the player, for a buff called Bone Shield, and if it is not on me, then this trigger evaluates to true. The second trigger, now there is one thing that you need to know. This is a trigger type called Aura. The second trigger is a trigger type called Status. Once you come into Status, these are all the various things that you can use. And what I wanted was an action usable status, and the spell is called Bone Shield. So, when I am on my Blood Death Knight, I do not have Bone Shield on me, and Bone Shield is off cooldown, then it will display this icon for me. Now there are a couple other triggers or a couple other auras I should say, that I have that do very similar things. Again, my Death and Decay, trigger number 1, status, action usable, Death and Decay. So if I can actually cast D&D at this particular moment, then this evaluates to true. 2, aura, it is a player buff called Crimson Scourge. That way I know that every Death and Decay I use is going to be free of charge for me. Again, we can come down here to Missing Horn, which is my Horn of Winter. Now this one is a little bit different. All of these triggers have to evaluate to true, and there are 3 of them. First, I'm checking for the buff called Horn of Winter, and I'll go ahead and tell you now that they are all inverse buffs, which means if I do not have Horn of Winter on me, then display the icon. Or actually, I should say, then this evaluates to true. If I do not have True Shot Aura, then that evaluates to true. If I do not have Battle Shout, that will evaluate to true. And if all 3 conditions are met, then I will have this icon show up, letting me know that I can cast Horn of Winter and I'm going to get, the attack speed buff. So that is a quick overview of cooldown usage as well as multiple triggers. So there are some other cooldowns that I have here that we can also look at, and I'm going to go through these. In fact, you're going to see 3 of them right here, and we're going to get to see some other cool things on the load screen. Soul Reaper is an ability that all Death Knight specs have access to. However, it is different for each one. The difference, my Blood spec, Soul Reaper consumes either a Death Rune or a Blood Rune. Frost spec, Death Rune or a Frost Rune. Unholy spec, Unholy Rune or Death Rune. So what I had to do was go in here and say I want to trigger for status, action usable. The spell was Soul Reaper. The interesting thing though is that I could not create this typing that spell. I had to go out to Wowhead, find the exact spell ID, and tell it this is the spell that I want. And if you look at my load, you will see the specialization is blood. So these two will never be available to me if I'm in my blood spec. Currently I'm in my frost spec, so it's actually this one that is active at this particular moment. There actually is a second trigger in here, and that second trigger is a status trigger. The health of my target must be below 35%. So if my target drops below 35% and I have either a frost rune or a unholy rune, a frost rune or a death rune, and the target is under 35% health, then I will have this icon show up letting me know I need to cast Soul Reaper at this particular moment. We're going to do a quick overview of the next type of aura, and that is a text aura. And actually you can see it right there. So what I've done is I've just created a new aura and called it test. And what I've done is I wanted it to be an event type looking in the combat log for a spell call, whenever that cast begins is when I want this aura to come off. Now here are some other things that you can do. So if you get a damage shield or a party kill, etc. But when I start casting Howling Blast, it's going to show this particular text message. And the one big difference is that you can do presets, as you can see on the screen right there, but you can also do whatever text you want right here. And it is going to be just fine with whatever it is. Wow, that was fun. Whatever it is that you want to show up there. Now, if you do want to do something like this, I do have to warn you, after you get done making the edits, you have to click accept. Hitting enter does nothing. So just a quick little heads up there for you. One of the last things that I'm going to show you is how to import an aura. So again, we go to our weak auras menu, come down here to import, and you can find, again, there's a list of websites below that will show you various auras that you can import. All you're going to do is copy the text, paste it, and these are all of the things that it will bring into weak auras for you. So right off the bat, I can tell you that it's going to create a group for me. It's going to have a lot of icons for various, it looks like Guardian Druid for this. So when you click import, you now should have your Druid Guardian icons. And there you go. That is how you import auras into weak auras. It's very easy. You can get some very, very quick auras going. If you still find it a little bit overwhelming to start your own aura creation, you can go download some from the various websites listed below. Okay, the last thing that we're going to talk about are groups in weak auras. Now when I come up here to new, there are two different types of groups that you see. There's the type called group, and then there's the type called dynamic group. And I'm going to show you the difference between these two. So these are, again, my Death Knight buffs. So if this is a group, then where you see this icon is where it will be on the screen every time this icon shows up. The same for this icon, the same for this icon, the same for this icon. So if I switch specs real quick, you can actually see a few different icons. They will pop up for me. So now I have 3 different icons that show up, and I can tell you right now that this group is actually a dynamic group, which means that every time an icon is used, if there are several in the list, this list is going to continue to move up and up until it hits my anchor point right here. So again, if I close this, and now if I put up my blood presence, you see that the icon moved up. It did not stay here with a gap in the middle. So if you're somebody who is very, very concerned, and whenever I go back and turn off blood presence, it shows up right in the middle again. If you are concerned with screen real estate, This is one of, if not the most important things you can do with your groups, is create everything as a dynamic group. So we're also going to take a look at groups as a set of auras, because in essence that's what they are. So if you come up here, you can see that you have a group tab, and this will tell you how it's going to display. So what I want this thing to do is to grow down, which means as new auras become available, they're just going to keep, adding down here, down, down, down. You can change this to grow up, so they would start here and go up, or however else you want to do it. I just prefer mine to go down. You can do left and right. So if you prefer to have icons going across your screen, you can do that. That is perfectly fine. You can set up borders, and you can kind of go through some of these options on your own. You come down here to display, and again, you get quite a lot of the same options that we've already seen. There's not a whole lot of need to go through there. Triggers, if you really wanted to go nuts with triggers, remember each one of these auras already has 1, 2, 3 triggers on it, so there's not a lot of need for me to do anything else. However, if you wanted to do more than what's already there, then you can. Load, this is something that is very, very important. So I can tell each individual aura inside of here to load or not to load, or I can tell the entire group not to load. And as you can tell, I've already done that by saying, I want you to load whenever you're playing on your Death Knight, and that's it. Now you will see a couple of these that are in green or in blue, etc. And if you hover over them, you can see here's a listing of all the auras that you have and why it is or is not being selected. So for example, my 3 presences, Blood Presence, Frost, and Unholy, I actually want them to show up out of combat. I do not want to start a fight and then realize, oh crap, I'm not in a presence or I'm in the wrong presence. So it's green because some of the things are being selected, others are not. For player class, everything is, I've already told every aura in here to be a part of my Death Knight, or to be Death Knight specific, so it's going to come out as checked. And again, you have it here where talent specialization, everything is enabled for a specific talent except Horn of Winter, because that is across talents. That is across specs. Action, same thing. Animations, the same thing that you've already seen. There is one last thing that we need to cover when it comes to groups, and that is how to add something to a group or take something out of a group. So this group right here, I'm going to take my Vengeance icon out of this group. To do that, you have a few options over here, and all I'm going to do is click the one that points to the left. That is going to remove it from that group. Now to get it back into a group, you're going to see this little arrow, and nicely it says group. You're going to click on that arrow, and then it's going to highlight the groups that you can put that into, and you just click on the group that you want it in, and there you go. Another thing that you need to know about groups is that even though this is a dynamic group, everything in here is in a set order, which is the reason why if I turn this off and I come over here, every time my Blood Presence is going to show up in between these 2 other icons. Doesn't matter what else I do, it's always going to show up in that order. You can actually change the order by simply going in here. You have the left icon, which is ungroup. You can also move things up and down in your group by simply clicking the up and down arrow. And now, whenever I leave this and I turn off Blood Presence, it is now on top instead of in the middle. So that is the end of this guide on weak auras. I hope that this has helped you out. If it has, wonderful. If it hasn't, I'm sorry, I guess. I don't know. But if you're in my guild, then you know who I am. you can easily come and ask me any questions. If you're watching this and you're not in the guild, then by all means, create a level 1 character on Whisperwind. Look me up. My name is Darth Decay. It's in the last video, actually. And look me up and ask me questions. I will happily answer any questions that I can and give any help that I can. There's a lot of stuff in this video that I did not cover. The reason I didn't cover it is because I don't feel comfortable covering things of which I have little or no expertise at all. So things like custom functions. I can show you a custom function real quick. There is a custom function on, on my Vengeance icon. So you can see my icon down here, and it will display my actual attack power gain from Vengeance, and that is this function. Don't know how to write that function. I have no idea how you would go about creating that, but there it is. So there are a lot of, again, I'm going to point you to the links that are in the description. They are wonderful for showing you a lot of auras, a lot of types of auras. They have custom functions. You can go through there. You can go to various websites and ask for help. But I'm not going to cover them in this video because, again, I simply don't feel comfortable doing that. Again, this is Darth Decay. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. If you have any questions, please let me know. I would be happy to try to help you out.